Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight, second day keynote lecture by Dr. Jorgensen. Again, today we're gonna have this keynote lecture in hybrid style. So not only in this hall, but also the online people can join this keynote speech, keynote lecture. So tonight, the keynote lecture is given by Dr. John Jorgensen. And probably most people who study Korean Chan should know his name. And we are very happy to have here to give us our keynote lecture tonight. John Jorgensen is a senior researcher associate in Chinese Study Research Center at Mujaku University, and also a specialist in not only Korean Buddhism, but also Chinese and Japanese Buddhism. He taught at the Griffith University in Queensland and was the teacher of the Australian University before taking up his current role at Ryukoku University. So, but you already retired.
I'm retired.
Yeah, but also, so he already retired. But he's a very, a long-term and wonderful scholar who translated numerous. I say enormous. I checked his CV or the enormous. Cannot introduce all, but probably most of the scholars and students who study, especially Chan and Chinese Buddhism, would know his contributions. So I would like to Dr. John Jorgensen to speak there. And tonight, I would like to ask to preside this keynote lecture by Professor Welder of Arizona. So, thank you very much.
Whenever you're ready. Thank you for the very kind introduction. The last position I had disappeared when COVID came around and the China Center was abolished. So I've been semi-retired for over 12 years, thank goodness, because of university administration and so on, it becomes such a problem. Tonight I want to talk about Mujaku Dōchu and these two monasteries. And the reason I took up this topic was when Professor Walter asked me to participate in this conference. I thought, I don't know anything about Southern Sun, I don't know anything much about Kamakura, Mumachi Buddhism, but I do know about Mujaku. And when I started flicking through his works, these names, Jingshan, for example, came up frequently, and of course, I knew it was near Hangzhou, so that was my starting point. And so, the reason I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but because the full text is on Dropbox. So I'm going to deal with these topics, Mujaku and Ogaku, which is a problem in itself. Mujaku and what I've called the Myōshinji project, Mujaku and Jingshan-si, and Mujaku and maps of the 5 mountains, monasteries, the Wushan monasteries of China, and Mujaku and the pure regulations, the Shingi, and Mujaku finally an addendum, Mujaku scholarship and arts.
Sorry? If you sit down, they can see you in the camera.
Okay, sorry. I'm used to standing and talking.
Yeah, and I don't. If you don't mind, thank you.
Okay, this is unfortunately not a very good picture of Mujaku Dōchu, who was very long-lived. He was the abbot of Ryukoku in Myōshinji, and in a couple of days' time, we'll probably pass by it. In the estimation of Professor Yanagida Seizan, Mujaku Dōchu was the greatest Zen scholar probably of all time. He wrote over 477 books, is not an exact term, but texts anyhow. And that's only by some account. We don't fully know his total output. Some of it's gone missing. Now, just to give you a background, he was born in Toyooka on the Japan seaside, and his mother divorced and she remarried, but the family didn't like the child, and so Mujaku wasn't very clever. He was clearly an intelligent boy. His mother, who was a Soto Zen devotee, brought him to Kyoto to become a monk. And she took him to a Jodo temple, or monastery, and he said, no, I want to become a Zen monk. So at the time, a man called Jikuin Solomon, who was the founder of Ryukoku, decided to take the boy in and started his education at the age of 8. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Jikuin, because this is part of the key to understanding Mujaku's attitude towards particularly the Obaku monks. Jikuin was a junior monk in Myōshinji. He was sent down to Nagasaki to await the arrival of Yuan Longji. Yuan came to visit him and asked Jikuin to intercede with the daimyo to find a place for him to base himself as a base for his teaching. Jikuin did so. In fact, he had a very powerful friend here in Kyoto, the Kyoto Shoshidai, a sort of Bakufu government representative here, overseeing the aristocracy and the imperial family and so on in this region. Itakura gave him an introduction to some very powerful people. Besides the shogun, the next two powerful people, I'm trying to remember their names now. Matsudaira was one, and the other was Sakai, I think, by memory. Anyhow, Sakai said, look, you're not even an abbot. We can't even take your application seriously unless you are an abbot. But Matsudaira immediately arranged finance to build Ryukoku, which is down this bottom corner here. What do you have here? Here. And in fact, it was arranged in the next year. The building was completed within a year. But in the meantime, the incoming abbot of Myōshinji, a man called Ryukoku, he brought yin yang to Tonda, between here and Osaka, to his temple, and without permission of the authorities. Now that upset Jikuin, because Jikuin had used a lot of his political capital, if you like, to obtain permission to get yin yuan to Myōshinji. And the other problem Jikuin had was that the Obaku monks, Yin Yuan Lungchi, were rather arrogant, and they were not grateful for what was going on, for all the work that Jikuin had put in. According to Mujaku's Obaku Geki, which has been translated by Baroni, Yin Yuan asked Jikuin to intercede, and he did so, but when Jikuin resigned, he felt he'd been betrayed. Now, he wasn't bitter. He didn't break relationships with Yin Yuan. Yin Yuan actually came several times to Ryugein, and a number of other leading Obaku monks, both Chinese and Japanese, visited. But Mujaku, on the other hand, saw Jikuin as the surrogate father, the father he never really had. And he felt this had been an insult to Jikuin. And so he was quite scathing, in fact, very scathing, about some of the Obaku monks. Now, it wasn't just that incident. There was another incident. And I've described it. It was on the 300th anniversary of the foundation of Myōshinji. And one of the Obaku monks said the following, at the time, a Ming monk, Yin Yuan, came to Japan. And his followers said of themselves, the Japanese Zen has been destroyed and the restoration work will be due to us. And the Gudo, who was presiding at this ceremony, said, oh no, there are some of the 24 transmissions of Chan into Japan, quite a number have survived, and our line, our Kazan line, is strong and will continue to be strong, and sort of refuted this. So that was another problem that Mujaku saw. This account, by the way, is found in Mujaku's gazetteer of Myōshinji, the Shobo Zanchi. This is just something to show that Yin Yuan continued on to meet with Jikuin. So that's the calligraphy on the nameplate of Ryugein. So the next thing is Mujaku and the Myōshinji project. What do I mean by the Myōshinji project? It was to make Myōshinji the premier Zen monastery, a Sorin. Now this means a major teaching monastery which has the support of the authorities. Now the reason for this is when you start to look at the history of Myōshinji. It was established by Emperor Hanazono, hence Hanazono University. Emperor Hanazono donated his detached palace to be the monastery. I've given 2 dates here because of Mujaku's accounts include original documents or copies thereof, and there are some discrepancies between them, which he was aware of. But what happened then is now Myōshinji ended up on the wrong side of a political fight between two warlords, to put it bluntly, and they lost. So Myōshinji's temple, lands, and so on were taken over by Nanzenji in 1399, which was a humiliation. However, the lands and the lineage were restored in 1432, but soon after, in the Onin Civil War in 1467 to 1477, and I don't know what date it was, the whole thing was burnt down. So they're on the setback after setback. An emperor gave Sekko Sōshin in 1477 an order to rebuild Myōshinji, no doubt with imperial support. Sōshin and his 4 pupils founded 4 tachu. Tachu are like a sub-monastery, a branch monastery, but within the compound or just outside the compound of the main monastery. It's a term that appears only in Japan, tachu. It's not a Chinese or a Korean thing. They also put in a rotating abbotship. So every so many years, a new abbot would be appointed from one of the tachu. And they decided to expand Myōshinji beyond Myōshinji itself into the countryside, into the regions, so that if there was a disaster, like a fire or war or something, there was some place they still had from which to operate. So it was a survival mechanism. And to do this, they needed to popularize their teachings. So they had popular funeral ceremonies and so forth. But also it led to, in the eyes of some, a degradation of the practice of koan. They were largely following Daie, according to some accounts, of the Kanna-zen or Kanhwa-chan. And what happened is something called Missa-zen, in which the answers to the koans are circulated secretly. This, of course, is a no-go. I mean, it means you're undermining the whole practice, at least according to people who follow Kanna-zen. And it also led to a proliferation of tachu. You saw on the map before how many of them there were. You'll see in a couple of days how many tachu there are around the core of Myōshinji. Martin Colcott made a remark saying that the Vance Hall is the powerhouse of a monastery, and yet soon after this time, it was derelict at Myōshinji. The tachu had taken over, and so there was a divergence of opinions and practices and so on going on. So you have a new regime coming in. There was a whole lot of trouble that Myōshinji had with Takeda Shingen and Oda Nobunaga and a whole pile of people. You will see perhaps on your tour on Thursdays that some of these sites. So there were 2 leading monks, Gudo Toshoku and Daigo Sochiku. And they decided to revive Rinzai Zen by restoring the practice, particularly the practice of Hensang, in which you go and consult different masters around the countryside. They set you koan to practice, and you try and answer and so on. But you need to go from place to place, not just sitting in your tachu with your own master. No, it's got to be broader than that. And Mujaku, in fact, did that. He too did Hensan when he was about 20. And his initial satori, I suppose, enlightenment perhaps, was a session on the Hekigan rock of the Bienlu at Fukiagi-dera over in Wakayama. Now, he tried to go and see Gudo and Daigu, but they both died before he got to their monasteries, unfortunately. He got over as far as Fukui Prefecture at Dayanji, and he had a dream in which Jikuin challenged him, saying, "Can you hold on to this staff?" I think it was. And Mujaku in the dream said, "Yes, I think I can." Jikuin said, "No, I don't think you can." The Mujaku then told this story to one of the senior monks at Dayanji and said, "Look, your enlightenment is incomplete. You need to." And so Mujaku went back to Jikuin, and he heard Jikuin reading the Keitokudento rock of the Jinta Trandanglu in the next room, and he had his enlightenment, because his enlightenment was about sound. The other part of this Myōshinji project was to get back to the proper observation of the shingi, of the pure regulations. So Mujaku knew all this stuff because he was a historian and administrator of Myōshinji. He knew its history because he chronicled it, he wrote it down, he wrote all the documents out, and he knew about the need for reform. He admired these two, Gudo and Daigu, and he wrote the history of Myōshinji. He listed its buildings, all its possessions, what their functions were. He was an administrator. He was the secretary of the monastery, which is a very important post, by the way, because you have to deal not only with the political authorities, but with the emperor, and you have to be able to write in the correct style, both in Japanese and in Kambun. You know, this is, even in China, this was a very important position, often forgotten about. He was also treasurer for a period, and he reorganized all the accounts and everything, and even wrote a little text on advice to the next treasurer. He was also abbot 3 times. So he wrote on much of this stuff and about administration, about proper observation of the regulations and so forth. And he said Myōshinji needs to be a sorin, a major teaching monastery, and not a sanrin, which was a derogatory term used by Gozan and some other temples about Myōshinji. Now in China, that didn't have quite the same nuances, but in Japan, it was a major issue. And unfortunately, this comes from Mujaku's Zenrin Shoki Sen, his major work on a sort of encyclopedia cum dictionary of all the buildings, functions, contents, and so on of a monastery. And it doesn't appear just here. It also appears in his Shobo Zanji. And so this shows that this was very important to Mujaku, for him to repeat it at some length. Shows that it was something that was really on his mind. This is maybe not in his calligraphy, but this is the one that was a manuscript that was republished by Yanagi de Seizan. Now we turn to Jingshan-si. I've stayed away from Sung, China for a fair bit now, and this you can, well, if you look at that major inlet, where at the head of which is Hangzhou, well, you go about 25 kilometers northwest, and you come to Jingshan-si. And it's on an important route. That's just a modern. You can see it's on a col. It's between two hills, fairly low range hills. But this was a shortcut to go, hence Jingshan, the shortcut mountain road, to go into the hinterland, further inland further inland into Jiangnan. So it's strategically located. Now, Mujaku wrote something, a record of the famous mountain monasteries of China, and he listed Jingshan-si in Linnanfu in Hangzhou as the first of the 5 mountains, the number 1. Jingshan-si was important because Mujaku belonged to the lineage of Kanzan again, which can be traced back to several abbots of Jingshan-si. And when you look at what Mujaku's important works were, they are members of his lineage, major exemplars, if you like. So, Huineng, the Platform Sutra, is Rokuso Dankyo Suichoso, Linji, the Linji Lu, the Rinzai Eisho Zenji Goroku Soyaku, which is a very influential text. Yanagida says, Iri Yoshitaka, Paul Demerville, all used this commentary to help understand this text. Dahui Zhonggao, so the Dahui Shu and his large Dae Kakuzenji Shokoroju, and Dahui was an abbot of Jingshan-si. And the next one, Shutang. Shutang Lu, the Kido Goroku Riko, is 1,200 plus pages of gloss commentary. Shows you how important this person was for Mujaku and for the lineage he belonged to. And Shutang was also an abbot of Jingshan-si. Shutang Zhiyu, in a lot of Chinese accounts, is not such an important person. So in the first gazetteer of Jingshan-si, Shutang is just merely listed as the 40th abbot. There's no information or anything else on him. The next one that was written by a lay person about 100 years later, the Jingshan Shu, has some more information. In fact, says he was actually invited by the king of Koryo to come to Korea, which he did not do. Why is he important to Mujaku? Because he is the link between China and Japan. Shutang was a Chinese master, and Nampo Shomyo, and there's quite a few pronunciations of his name, was the student who took the seal of approval from Shutang and founded the lineage that led to Myōshinji. So that's why he's important. He's an important link. And Mujaku wrote on several other members of the Myōshinji lineage in Japan, but I don't need to go into that. So Jingshan-si itself, it is founded by the Nyoto master, Fa Qin, who died in 792. It was not an important monastery at that time, although this Zhejiang was beginning to develop commercially in the 790s. After, in the early Tang, it had been sort of a bit of a backwater, but now it suddenly became more and more important. It was only in 1090 that it became a a shufan, an all directions monastery. Professor Nishitani, in his earlier talk today, gave you a picture of one of the monks who was traveling from monastery to monastery. That's where they went. They went to the shufan one, the shufan monastery. So it became larger. But Mujaku says it was Dahui who made Jingshan the greatest Chan monastery, a soaring in his terms, from 1137. But he also mentioned, yes, this was also the time that Hangzhou became the capital of southern Song. So he's implying that, yes, there was a lot of resources coming in from monks and from patrons fleeing from North China from the Khitan. And that really pushed the development of Hangzhou commercially and religiously, in my opinion, anyhow. Dahui was significant for Mujaku because he's the creator of the Kanhua Chan. And of all the masters cited by Mujaku, Dahui is the overwhelming favorite. I've gone through a number of his texts, and it's just, it's Dahui 10, next person 6 or 5. You know, it's really quite extraordinary. Shu Tang, the abbot, number 40 of Jingshan-si, was important, as I said, because of Nampo being enlightened under his charge. Nampo, in fact, may have been quite an extraordinary individual as well, because Shu Tang appointed him as in charge of the guests. So originally he was at another monastery, and then they shifted to Jingshan-si, and still Nampo was made the officer in charge of taking in the guests. So it was an important post. Heinrich Dumoulin said that Nampo developed a sense of national responsibility in which Japan could equally be a home to Chan, and that it was not the sole prerogative of the Chinese. So maybe there is something here too about the reason for trying to keep Myōshinji as a strong monastery. Mujaku's appreciation then for Jingshan-si and for Shu Tang was almost as great as it was for Dahui. In his Zenrin Shoki Sen, for example, Jingshan-si is mentioned 37 times, more than any other monastery. Probably you could total up all the other monasteries and probably not equal Jingshan-si. Shu Tang is mentioned 48 times, second in number of mentions to Dahui. Okay. So, one of the things we've learned is that all the major monasteries in Japan, the Zen monasteries, were burnt down at some stage by Mujaku's time. Myōshinji, Nanzenji, Kenninji, so forth. Most of them have been burnt down. And one of the things that I think Mujaku saw as important was trying to get back to the original institutional framework that had been in southern Song. And he especially, of course, would have looked at Jingshan-si. The problem was they were, as Professor Nishitani said, that they were bringing Chinese workmen and architects to build the monasteries. But then what happened after that, when relations with China were not so good, and there were not as many people around? Well, there were 2 sets of drawings or maps. I can't remember where they were held, but they were very hard to access. Mujaku spent 30 years chasing these things up, not seeing them necessarily himself, but getting friends, associates to go and see them and make copies as accurate as possible. And so maybe these two maps, two series of drawings of maps belong, maybe they came from one's original set, I don't know. This is Mujaku's, an elevation of part of Jingshan-si. It has measurements and so on. Unfortunately, it's a bit small. But that's the type of thing he did. Mujaku, it's a scroll of about 48 frames. Okay, here's another one. This is a plan, again, of Jingshan-si. I can't remember, it's a monk hall. But anyway, he was interested in this stuff. He really wanted to get the buildings correct. And the reason is because of the pure regulations. Just look at the Chūshō Baijang Qinggui, or the Chokushu Hyakujo Shingi. And you have to know the buildings. It refers to buildings where you conduct this ritual and the order in which the monks proceed and their seating arrangements and how many times you hit the mokoto bells and various things. You know, he's got all of that information in there. Mujaku was an expert on Shingi. He spent from about the age of 30 till his death continually writing on this, updating it, and he got new information. He even read the Obaku Shingi. He was scathing about Obaku, but he still read it. That's new information. And he compiled it all into a massive in the modern set, 2 volumes of the Chokushu Hyakujo Shingi Sake. Now, anyone who wants to study the pure regulations needs to read this. They need to consult it. One of our colleagues, Ifa, I know she did, and there's a Japanese scholar whose name I've forgotten, who translated it. He didn't translate the preface, but that's for another day. Mujaku wrote not just on the soaring, what he hoped the Myōshinji would be. He wrote also for small monasteries because Myōshinji had branch monasteries, and some of them were quite small. So he had to, he wrote in 1684 a manual for Shingi for adapted for small monasteries. And his interest in all of these regulations and rituals just continued on and on. By 1700, he had written a 1,400-page commentary on this text. And I can't say I've been through it all. He supplemented and added to it for another 18 years. Okay, so the pure regulations also involve politics. Unavoidable, but the fate of monasteries was linked to political changes. We've already seen with the history of Myōshinji what had happened when they were on the wrong side. They lost their monastery for a period. He was very aware, though, of the political origins of the Chūshō Baijang Qinggui and how the Yuan, the Mongol imperial patronage would change the fortune of a monastery. I can't think, Tok Timur, Emperor Shundi, I think it is, initiated this demand for a new set of Shingi, which was to be applied across the empire. So, what Mujaku does not tell us, and I think this is a key to part of his ideas was he didn't say that the Yuan Emperor made a monastery in Nanjing where the authors of the Qinghui, the new Qinghui, were located. He made it a monastery above the 5 mountains, which meant that Jingshan-si was demoted. Right? He doesn't mention it. He surely knew it. And I think he was trying to preserve the status of Jingshan-si because this was one of his models for Myōshinji. And it was a caution against attempts by other monasteries, such as Nanzenji, to try and make itself superior over Myōshinji by manipulation of political power. Mujaku's legacy then lies in attempts to create a robust administrative system for Myōshinji, financially, in regulations, in practice, and modeling themselves on important Sung dynasty monasteries and the correct observation of the Zen regulations, Shinki. Finally, this is an addendum, a little sideline, if you like. Mujaku was a great scholar, and most of his scholarship is devoted, as I said, to administration, the correct readings of texts like the Linjilu and so forth. You know, if you get a word wrong, it can mean you get a whole idea wrong, and then you're led down the wrong path, and you don't get to enlightenment. Mujaku was opposed to the abandonment of scholarship and arts. He supported the Gozan literature, and he opposed prohibition of scholarship by Zen masters, or even by Zen monks. He felt that, or they declared, the prohibition on scholarship by Zen masters is an obstacle to the way. This is not just going out and getting enlightenment like that, or some crazy Zen. He knew about what had happened in Ming Dynasty China and so forth, and how Zen had become, in some senses, corrupt. A lot of second-raters. In fact, one Qing emperor even thought he was a Zen master, a Chan master, and you didn't dare contradict him. So Mujaku felt there was a lack of enlightenment teachers in Japan. This is hard talk, you know. It's saying, look, most of these guys, they don't really know this stuff. They're not really enlightened. They've received the seal of approval from a master. Is that really enough? You know, it's like, okay, you're enlightened, but if you look back at the teachings of people like Toomey, you need to follow it up. You need to know how to teach the next generation of students. You need to also prove that this enlightenment is in line with the text of the Buddha. Otherwise, we're not Buddhists. So Mujaku was saying, yes, scholarship. I'm happy to have poetry and art and all of these things that the Gozan produce. It's just not happy about how their attitude towards Myōshinji. And I think he respected Wuzhun Shifan. Now, unfortunately, he seems to have only read about this master or this master's text late in life. So, but he may have been influenced earlier by reading sort of general accounts in things like Wudang Huiyuan and so forth. Wuzhen Shufan was a great restorer of Jingshan-si after it was burnt down in 1233. And he was also, I think, influenced by the person we heard about today again from Professor Nishitani, Anthony Bennen, who Bernard Ford last night also mentioned, another vastly learned scholar. And so Mujaku himself was a poet, though he never published. He was encouraged to, but he didn't. But he did write commentaries on verses by Chan monks, 10 of them by Shu Tang. This is the Jiang of Feng Yue Ji, which was extremely popular amongst Gozan monks. Mujaku wrote a gloss commentary on it, and his pupil further added more material. Shu Tang, in a sense, he was a link between poetry and Jingshan-si. If Shu Tang was a decent poet, then that had to be respected, I think. Mujaku, as I said, he never published. There are two main collections I want to go on that. Painting, he was also, well, interested, is the best word. Wuzhen, the restorer of Jingshan-si, was also a skilled artist. And the famed artist Muchi Fa-chan, who died around 1280, was allegedly a pupil of Wuzhen, and some of Muchi's paintings were brought back to Japan. Mujaku appreciated such pieces of art, mentioning those held in Myōshinji, but he was critical, stating that Muchi was not a Dharma heir of Wuzhen, there was no proof of this, and that his paintings, according to one Chinese critic, were of poor quality. So he was not just accepting everything that came out of China. But I found in his Gazette of Kenninji, he noted the exact locations of statues and paintings, even going to the trouble of making thumbnail sketches of a painting by Muchi. Muchi was a monk who founded Ryōtongsu near Hangzhou. His artwork can be found in Daitokuji. This is the Daitokuji one, not in color. The original has some color in it. This is Mujaku's paintings of or sketch of what he found in Kenninji. So he was clearly interested in documenting even things like works of art. In conclusion then, as part of the project to make Myōshinji the leading monastery of the Rinzai order, by emphasis on obedience to the pure regulations for monasteries, the practice of hensan, the proper use of koan, Mujaku often looked to the example of Jingshan-si, the first of the 5 mountain monasteries in China. And he couldn't avoid it when he studied 2 of the exemplars of his lineage, Dahui and Shutang. Both are abbots of Jingshan-si. Mujaku used some of this evidence to provide plans for Myōshinji's monasteries and their operations, and to give correct advice on the correct regulations of them. And perhaps he and Hakuin are the 2 figures. In fact, Hakuin wrote once to Mujaku asking a question about something. These 2, one is the spiritual practice, and the other one is the scholar, administrator, who's trying to keep Myōshinji as an important monastery. And that's, I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.